The first car appeared on Tuesday morning at 7:15, parked directly across from my driveway like a deliberate obstruction. I'm Clayton Moore, 34, Senior Finance Officer at Meridian Credit Union. I've lived in Stone Crossing Subdivision in Stonevale, Indiana for 6 years. Never had parking issues before. Our street has plenty of space. The silver Honda Accord sat there for 3 hours, driver nowhere in sight. I checked the HOA covenants that evening. Section 4.2 clearly states visitor parking cannot exceed 72 consecutive hours on residential streets. This wasn't visitor parking. This felt intentional. Wednesday brought a blue Toyota Camry. Same spot. Different license plate. Thursday, a red Ford Explorer joined the Honda. Both vehicles positioned to block clear access to my driveway. I had to reverse twice just to back out for work. I documented everything. Photos with timestamps. License plate numbers. Exact positioning measurements using my contractor's tape measure. The vehicles parked precisely 18 inches from the curb. Legal distance. Calculated placement. Friday morning, I counted 4 cars, all different owners, all parked in a perfect line facing my property. The message was unmistakable. Someone wanted me to notice. I called the Stonevale Police non-emergency line. Officer Martinez explained that public street parking falls under City Ordinance the 8th of April 12. Vehicles can park legally as long as they don't block fire hydrants or driveways. These cars technically violated nothing, but the pattern violated common sense. Saturday brought 5 vehicles. Sunday, 6. Each morning, I watched from my kitchen window as different neighbors walked away from freshly parked cars. Neighbors I recognized. Neighbors I'd waved to for years. Calvin Hall from Maple Ridge Drive. Nova Hall from Birchwood Lane. People I'd served on HOA committees with. People who'd borrowed my pressure washer and returned it clean. The realization hit like cold water. This wasn't random harassment. This was organized. Coordinated. Someone had convinced my neighbors to participate in a systematic campaign against me. But who would orchestrate something this elaborate? And why target me specifically? I pulled out my phone and started recording. That would matter later. Whatever was happening in Stone Crossing, I needed proof. The morning sun cast long shadows across the street as I counted 7 cars lined up like soldiers. Something was very wrong in my neighborhood. The parking campaign had been running for 2 weeks when I decided to investigate properly. As a finance officer for Marion County, I understood patterns. Numbers told stories. This situation screamed coordination. I started with the HOA records. Stone Crossing maintained detailed meeting minutes dating back 15 years. I requested copies from our current president, Nova Hall. She seemed nervous when I explained my parking concerns. Maybe people are just visiting more, she suggested, avoiding eye contact. The holidays bring extra traffic. It was March. I spent my lunch breaks at the Stonevale City Hall, reviewing public records, property ownership documents, voter registration lists, vehicle registration databases. The cars belonged to residents scattered across our subdivision, no obvious connection except geography. Then I found the smoking gun in the HOA archives. Meeting minutes from February 14th contained an agenda item I'd missed. Neighborhood Parking Initiative. Discussion of resident concerns. The meeting I'd skipped for my daughter's school play. The meeting where apparently my neighbors discussed me. According to the minutes, someone had raised ongoing issues with property maintenance and neighborhood standards at my address. The complainant wasn't named. The discussion was vague. But the outcome was clear. A community response to encourage compliance. I read that phrase 3 times. Community response. Encourage compliance. The next discovery came from my security camera footage. I'd installed a basic Ring doorbell system 6 months earlier after a package theft. The cloud storage kept 30 days of recordings. I scrolled through weeks of morning footage, watching the parking pattern develop. February 15th, first Honda Civic appears. Driver walks directly to Calvin Hall's house on Maple Ridge Drive. February 16th, Toyota Camry parks. Driver heads to Nova Hall's residence on Birchwood Lane. February 17th, Ford Explorer joins them. Driver walks to another neighbor's house. Each morning, the same routine. Different cars, different neighbors, same destination pattern. They were taking turns. Following a schedule. Someone had organized this down to the day. But who was the coordinator? I cross-referenced the meeting attendance records with the parking participants. 12 neighbors had attended that February 14th meeting. 11 of them were now participating in the parking rotation. The 12th name made my stomach drop. Margaret Thornfield. Former HOA president. My next-door neighbor for 8 years. Margaret had stepped down from the HOA presidency 6 months ago, citing health concerns. She'd been replaced by Nova Hall in an emergency election, but Margaret still attended every meeting, still offered guidance to the new board, still maintained her influence over neighborhood decisions. I remembered our last conversation clearly. Margaret had mentioned concerns about my, quote, property presentation. My grass was slightly longer than HOA standards preferred. My mailbox needed repainting. Minor issues that most neighbors overlooked. Apparently, Margaret hadn't overlooked them. I needed more before making accusations. I started documenting everything systematically. Spreadsheets, tracking vehicle rotations, photos of each car with timestamps, measurements of parking distances, license plate numbers cross-referenced with property ownership records. The pattern was undeniable. 12 neighbors, 12 different vehicles, rotating schedule ensuring constant presence, all organized after a meeting where my property was discussed. Wednesday evening, I decided to test my theory. I walked over to Calvin Hall's house while his Honda was parked in front of mine. Calvin was washing his truck in the driveway. "Hey, Calvin," I called out. "Notice you've been parking on Sycamore Street lately." His face flushed red. "Just visiting friends in the area." "Every morning for 2 weeks? Same time?" Calvin looked uncomfortable. "Margaret suggested we help with the parking situation. Said you'd appreciate the community support." Community support. Margaret's words, spoken through Calvin's mouth. "What parking situation?" I pressed. Calvin's expression shifted. Confusion replaced defensiveness. "The city ordinance violations. Margaret said you were getting citations for driveway parking. We're helping by using street spaces so you have alternatives. I'd never received a single parking citation. My driveway was perfectly legal. Margaret had lied to recruit her volunteers." "Calvin, I've never had parking violations. Check with the city if you want verification." His face went pale. "But Margaret showed us the citation copies. Said you were embarrassed to ask for help directly." The manipulation was breathtaking. Margaret had fabricated parking violations, convinced neighbors I needed help, and organized a harassment campaign disguised as community assistance. She turned my neighbors into unwitting accomplices. That evening, I called Nova Hall. As current HOA president, she needed to know what was happening. "Nova, I need to discuss the parking situation on Sycamore Street." "Oh, that." Her voice carried relief. "Margaret said you were grateful for the community support. We're happy to help with your citation problems." "I don't have citation problems. Margaret lied to you." Silence stretched across the phone line. "That's impossible," Nova finally said. "Margaret showed us documentation. Official city letterhead. Your name on violation notices. Forged documents. I can prove it." Nova's breathing became audible. "Clayton, are you suggesting Margaret fabricated city documents?" "I'm stating it as fact. She organized this entire campaign based on lies." The next morning, I found 8 cars parked in front of my house. The campaign was escalating. Margaret wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. I had enough to expose her. But I needed to be strategic about the confrontation. Margaret had spent years building relationships in Stone Crossing. She commanded respect and loyalty. Accusing her without overwhelming proof would backfire. I spent the weekend preparing my case. City records proving no violations existed. Security footage showing the organized nature of the parking. Meeting minutes documenting the community response decision. Neighbor statements about Margaret's false documentation. Monday morning, I called Margaret directly. "We need to talk," I said. "Of course, Clayton. I've been meaning to check on your parking situation. The neighbors have been so helpful." "The parking situation you created with forged city documents." The line went quiet for 10 seconds. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Margaret said carefully. "No misunderstanding. I have. We can discuss this privately, or I can present it to the HOA board and the county sheriff's office." Another pause. When Margaret spoke again, her voice carried a different tone. Harder. More calculating. "You're making serious accusations, Clayton. I hope you're prepared to defend them." The threat was subtle but clear. Margaret wasn't going to admit anything easily. This was going to be a fight. I scheduled the confrontation for Thursday evening. The HOA board meeting was set for 7 p.m. in the Stone Crossing Community Center. I arrived 30 minutes early with 3 manila folders containing my name. Calvin Hall, the current HOA president, greeted me at the door. "Clayton, good to see you. Margaret mentioned you wanted to address the board about parking concerns." Something like that. Margaret arrived precisely at 7. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the confident expression of someone who believed she controlled the narrative. She nodded politely as she took her seat at the board table. "Before we begin regular business," I said, "I need to present of document fraud and harassment." The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Margaret's smile never wavered. "Clayton, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the city violations. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No, this needs to be public record." I opened the first folder. "These are copies of alleged city violation notices bearing my name and address. Margaret distributed these to neighbors to justify organized parking harassment." Calvin examined the documents. "These look official. They're forgeries." I opened the second folder. "These are actual records from the Stonevale Code Enforcement Office. No violations exist for my property. No citations have ever been issued to my address." Margaret leaned. "Clayton, I received those documents directly from City Hall. If there's an error in the system, you created the documents yourself." I placed a printed email on the table. "This is correspondence from Code Enforcement Supervisor Janet Morrison confirming no violations exist and stating that the documents you distributed contain formatting inconsistencies with official city letterhead." The board members exchanged glances. Margaret's confident expression finally cracked. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have security footage showing the coordinated nature of the parking campaign. Neighbors arriving simultaneously, parking in formation, leaving together. This isn't random parking, it's organized harassment." I played the video on my laptop. The footage clearly showed cars arriving within minutes of each other, drivers communicating before positioning their vehicles, and the systematic nature of the daily routine. Calvin studied the screen. "Margaret, did you coordinate this parking arrangement?" "I simply informed concerned neighbors about ongoing code violations. Community members have the right to park on public streets." "Based on forged documents," I said, "which constitutes fraud and harassment." Margaret stood abruptly. "I don't have to listen to these accusations. Clayton is clearly unstable and looking for someone to blame for his property maintenance issues. Sit down, Margaret." Calvin's voice carried authority. "We need to address this properly." I opened the third folder. These are signed statements from 4 neighbors, confirming that Margaret showed them official-looking documents and specifically requested they park in front of my house daily. Nova Hall confirmed Margaret used the phrase community response and claimed city backing. Margaret's face flushed red. "Those neighbors are lying. They're protecting Clayton because they feel sorry for him." "The documents speak for themselves," Calvin said. "If these violation notices are fraudulent, we have a serious problem." I pulled out my phone. I recorded our conversation Monday morning. "Margaret, would you like me to play the part where you threatened me for investigating the forged documents?" Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. "You recorded me without consent? That's illegal." "Indiana is a one-party consent state. The recording is admissible." Calvin looked exhausted. "Margaret, I need you to explain how you obtained these city documents." Margaret gathered her portfolio. "I don't owe anyone explanations. This board has no authority over my personal communications with neighbors." "Actually, we do," Calvin said. "Harassment of residents violates HOA covenants. Fraud potentially violates state law." Margaret headed for the door. "You'll be hearing from my attorney." After Margaret left, the board voted unanimously to suspend her from all HOA activities pending investigation. Calvin agreed to contact the county sheriff's office about potential fraud charges. The next morning, I called the Stonevale County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Sarah Chen took my statement and reviewed the pros. She confirmed that document forgery constituted criminal fraud under Indiana Code 354352. "We'll need to interview the neighbors who received the false documents," Deputy Chen said. "Can you provide contact information?" I handed her the list. "They're all willing to cooperate." Deputy Chen scheduled interviews for the following week. She also recommended I contact the county mental health crisis team, as Margaret's behavior suggested possible psychological issues requiring professional intervention. Officer Avery Rodriguez from Behavioral Health called me Tuesday afternoon. We've reviewed the case file. The systematic nature of this harassment campaign, combined with the document forgery, indicates potential mental health concerns. We'd like to conduct a wellness check. What does that involve? We'll attempt to speak with Margaret about getting voluntary mental health services. If she refuses and continues the harassment, we can pursue involuntary evaluation under Indiana Code 12-26. Officer Rodriguez visited Margaret Wednesday morning. According to his report, Margaret denied any wrongdoing and refused mental health services. However, she agreed to cease all contact with neighbors regarding parking issues. The parking campaign stopped immediately. No cars appeared in front of my house Thursday morning. The sudden absence felt surreal after weeks of daily harassment. Friday afternoon, Deputy Chen called with an update. We've completed neighbor interviews. All 4 witnesses confirm Margaret showed them fraudulent city documents and specifically requested daily parking in front of your residence. We're filing charges for criminal fraud and harassment. Margaret was arrested the following Monday. The charges included fraud, harassment, and impersonation of a government official. Her bond was set at $5,000. Calvin called me that evening. The HOA board voted to permanently ban Margaret from all community activities. We're also implementing new policies requiring verification of any city documents before community action. The legal process moved quickly. Margaret's attorney negotiated a plea agreement, including restitution, community service, and mandatory mental health counseling. She was also required to send written apologies to all affected neighbors. I received Margaret's apology letter 3 weeks later. It was brief and clearly written by her attorney, but it acknowledged the fraud and harassment. More importantly, it included a commitment to seek ongoing mental health treatment. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Neighbors who had participated in the parking campaign approached me individually with apologies. Most claimed they genuinely believed they were helping enforce legitimate city violations. Nova Hall stopped by one Saturday morning. Clayton, I owe you a huge apology. Margaret was very convincing with those documents. I should have verified them independently. She fooled a lot of people. The documents looked authentic. Still, we should have questioned organized harassment, regardless of the supposed violations. That wasn't right. I appreciated the honesty. The experience had damaged some neighborhood relationships, but it also revealed who could be trusted during difficult situations. The HOA board asked me to present my case at the next community meeting. They wanted other residents to understand how the fraud occurred and learn to identify similar schemes. I agreed, hoping to prevent future harassment campaigns. Standing before 50 neighbors that Thursday evening, I explained the entire situation methodically. The forged documents, the organized parking, the investigation process, and the legal resolution. Several residents asked detailed questions about recognizing fraudulent city documents. The key lesson, I concluded, is verification. Always contact city offices directly to confirm violations. Never participate in organized harassment, regardless of the supposed justification. The meeting ended with applause and a formal community resolution supporting harassment victims. It felt like genuine healing was beginning. 6 months later, I stood in my front yard surveying the new landscaping. The Japanese maple I'd planted where Margaret's fake surveyor stakes once stood was already showing autumn colors. The harassment felt like a distant memory now. The neighborhood had genuinely healed. Property values remained stable despite the initial concerns about the fraud case. New residents moved into Margaret's former house. A young family with twin toddlers who brought life back to that corner lot. Calvin Hall approached while I was raking leaves. He'd become the new HOA president after emergency elections in January. Clayton, the board approved your proposal for the verification protocols. Every violation notice now requires dual confirmation from city offices before any community action. Good. That should prevent future organized harassment. We're also implementing quarterly educational meetings about document fraud. Would you consider leading the first session? I agreed. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about community manipulation that others needed to understand. My work at Meridian Financial had returned to normal productivity levels. The stress-induced insomnia had resolved completely by March. Dr. Patricia Chen, my physician, confirmed my blood pressure had returned to baseline ranges during my recent physical. The peer support network I'd established was growing steadily. I created a peer support network for harassment survivors that now included 12 members across 3 counties. We met monthly at the Stonevale Community Center, sharing experiences and prevention strategies. Margaret's mental health treatment appeared successful according to her probation officer's reports. She'd moved to Fort Wayne to live with relatives and was reportedly maintaining stable employment at an accounting firm. The city had implemented new safeguards for document requests after my case. Residents now received confirmation emails for all violation inquiries, making it harder to forge official correspondence. Nova Hall had become an unexpected ally. She'd researched property law extensively after the incident and now served as the neighborhood's informal advisor on boundary disputes and city ordinances. "Your case changed how I think about community involvement," she told me during a recent conversation. "Blind trust in authority figures can enable serious harm." The parking spaces in front of my house remained empty most days. Neighbors had developed new habits, using their own driveways and the community center lot for overflow parking. The street felt peaceful again. I'd learned to recognize the early warning signs of organized harassment campaigns. Sudden coordination among neighbors, unofficial document circulation, and pressure for immediate action without verification were all red flags worth investigating. The financial losses from the ordeal, legal fees, security system upgrades, and lost work productivity totaled nearly $8,000. Margaret's restitution payments covered most expenses, though the emotional recovery took longer than expected. Standing in my driveway that October evening, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children ride bicycles, I felt genuine contentment. The community had survived a serious betrayal and emerged stronger with better safeguards. The Harassment Survivor Support Network was planning a workshop series for spring. We'd partner with the county mental health crisis team to provide resources for both victims and perpetrators of neighborhood conflicts. My house felt like home again. The security cameras remained installed but rarely captured anything more threatening than delivery trucks and wandering cats. The hypervigilance had faded gradually over the summer months. The sunset painted the subdivision in warm golden light. Children's laughter echoed from the playground 2 blocks away. Normal suburban sounds had replaced the suspicion that once dominated these streets. It was finally over, and the silence felt earned.